April in the year 1944 arrived in Wünsdorf with a deceptive gentleness. Pale sunlight filtered through the pine trees surrounding the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters, glinting off puddles left by a night of cold rain. But inside the logistics wing, where fuel calculations and transport schedules had replaced dreams and optimism, spring brought no warmth at all. The air smelled of stale tobacco, wet wool, burnt coffee, and dread. Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Weber adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles and leaned closer to the decrypted Allied signal placed before him. The message had arrived only an hour earlier from the signal's intelligence branch, still warm from the code room printer. It mentioned, almost casually, a new Allied logistical measure, portable seabed pipelines, and a codename Weber had never encountered before PLUTO. Pipeline under the ocean, the English abbreviation helpfully noted. PLUTO. Weber read the line again, slowly, lips tightening. He was 29 years old, with the narrow shoulders and meticulous posture of an academic, accidentally pressed into a uniform. He was no frontline soldier. He fought a different war, one of tables, tonnage, and fuel consumption curves. To him, gasoline was blood, and shortages were bleeding. He tapped the message with a pencil. Pipelines under the sea. This cannot be correct, he murmured. Across the room, Oberstleutnant Friedrich Adler looked up from a map strewn with red pins marking fuel depots. What now, Weber? Another American boast? Last week they claimed they would pave the channel with rubber roads. This one is different, sir, Weber replied. It is a reference to a system that would, according to this, carry petrol across the seabed from Britain to the continent. Silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then laughter erupted. Unteroffizier Müller, hunched over a crate of captured aerial photos, slapped his knee. A pipeline under the channel? Why? Not pump sausages and beer while they are at it. Even Adler allowed himself a thin smirk. A pipe across the ocean floor. My dear Weber, that is not engineering. That is mythology. Weber tried again. The message is authentic. If accurate, the Allies are building a fuel supply line that bypasses tankers entirely. Müller wiped tears from his eyes. Perhaps next they will drag telegraph cables across the Atlantic. More laughter. Adler waved his hand dismissively. Pipes under the sea. Impossible. The pressures alone, never mind tides, storms, anchors, enemy mines. Weber. Britain has neither the steel nor the shipyard space. They cannot even feed their island without convoys, let alone lay kilometers of pipe under water. Weber hesitated. Sir, if they succeed, they will not. Adler's voice hardened. Fuel crosses oceans in tankers. Always has. Always will. The sea is a barrier, not a highway. That was the consensus in the logistics wing. Ocean protected Germany from the prospect of an unlimited fuel stream feeding an Allied invasion. Tankers could be sunk, ports could be bombed, fuel depots could be destroyed. The channel itself stood as the final wall. For nearly 5 years, that assumption had been unquestioned truth in Berlin. But Weber could not dismiss the signal so easily. He read through the Allied intercept again. One line stood out. Pumping stations to be disguised. Completion before major continental operations. Before major continental operations. That meant before the invasion. A chill slipped down Weber's spine. He rose from his desk and walked toward the central planning table, where Adler and 3 other officers were arguing about panzer allocations for a possible invasion near Calais. The giant map, scarred by thumbtacks, showed the channel as a thick strip of blue, a moat separating Britain from Hitler's Europe. Weber cleared his throat. Sir, may I speak freely? Adler sighed. If you insist. What if the Allies have already overcome the engineering challenges? Suppose they succeed in laying these pipelines. They could pump fuel directly from Britain into France. Once ashore, their divisions consume hundreds of thousands of litres each day. If they solve that problem, Adler interrupted, their problem, Weber, is not ours. The invasion will fail because their supply lines will choke on their own weight. Every expert agrees. Experts also claimed they could not build harbours in pieces and tow them across the channel. Weber replied softly. Yet aerial reconnaissance last month showed enormous concrete forms at several British ports. Moeller snorted. Mulberry harbours? Another fantasy. Weber pushed his glasses up again. Sir, the Allies have industrial capabilities we consistently underestimate. If they can place pipes under the sea, they cannot. Frustration. Arguing would lead nowhere. He returned to his seat, but the numbers swirled in his mind. Allied forces assembling in Britain numbered in the millions. Their air forces burned through fuel at astronomical rates. Their tanks, Shermans, Churchills, Cromwells, all gluttons for petrol. An invasion force that size required a dependable, high-volume fuel lifeline. Germany believed that lifeline did not exist. He studied the Allied message once more. Portable seabed pipelines, PLUTO, a childish codename with a childish premise or an engineering marvel quietly taking shape beyond their view. Outside, a train whistle wailed faintly across the fields. More synthetic fuel from Lohne on its way to panzer units strangling on shortage. More desperation shipped across a shrinking network. The strategic context pressed on Weber like a physical weight. The Allies were gathering overwhelming power in Britain. American production soared unimaginably. Thousands of aircraft. Thousands of tanks, oceans of fuel. The Luftwaffe was already a shadow of itself, starved by bombing and lack of aviation petrol. Panzer divisions waited for spring operations without adequate reserves. The Reich's synthetic fuel plants were targeted night after night. What if the Allies no longer relied on vulnerable tankers? What if the ocean he had counted on as a barrier had already been pierced by steel arteries pushing petrol to the continent? Weber looked again at the blue strip of the channel on the wall map. It no longer felt like a moat. It felt like an illusion, a conduit waiting to be claimed. Behind him, the officers resumed their laughter, mocking the absurdity of underwater pipelines. Their confidence was unshakable. Their assumptions seemed eternal. But Weber, staring at the decoded signal in his hands, felt no amusement. He felt only the quiet certainty that the world was about to change in ways Germany was not prepared to understand. The ocean was not a wall. Not anymore. The first warm days of May rolled over Berlin like a false promise. Blossoms appeared on ruined trees, children played in rubble courtyards, and the Reich's newspapers still published fantasies of final victory. But in the cramped engineering annex of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht Logistics Division, Oberingenieur Dieter Rombach stared at the Allied intercept. Weber had brought him 2 weeks earlier, and felt the dread of a man watching arithmetic murder an empire. Rombach was 42, short, balding, sharp-eyed, and relentless. Before the war, he had designed pipeline junctions for the German oil industry. He understood steel, pressure tolerances, pump systems, flow rates, corrosion, and above all, possibility. And the moment he read the word PLUTO, he felt something like a physical blow. He looked up at Weber, who hovered behind him anxiously. "You were right to bring this to me," Rombach said quietly. "This is not a joke." Weber felt a chill. "But the others are fools," Rombach snapped. "Or optimists, which is the same thing in wartime." He turned the paper over, reading again and again the short Allied reference: portable seabed pipelines, pumping stations disguised, operational before continental assault. Rombach exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "It can be done," he whispered. Weber blinked. "Sir, underwater pipelines? Across the entire channel? Yes. If you have enough steel, enough ships, enough pumps, enough engineers, and the British do have these things after all. They have America behind them." He rose and walked to the chalkboard, drawing a rough profile of the English Channel. Depth: roughly 100 to 150 feet in many areas. Currents strong but manageable. Temperature cold but not fatal to steel. Seabed mostly sand and chalk, relatively smooth compared to the North Sea. He tapped the drawing. Difficult? Yes. Impossible? No. Weber felt the floor shift. Beneath him, Rombach continued. To lay pipe underwater, you need one of two methods. Either unspool flexible pipe from a ship like cables, or weld stiff pipe sections and lower them gradually. Both methods exist. Both were experimented with before the war. But, across the channel, Weber whispered. Rombach nodded. Across the channel. With enough industrial muscle, you could lay dozens of kilometers in a few weeks. Weber swallowed hard. Sir, the staff believes tankers remain the only means to fuel an invasion. Rombach barked a humorless laugh. That is because the staff cannot imagine a world where Germany is not the technological leader. But the Allies innovate, constantly. Look at their radar, their long-range fighters, their Liberty ships assembled faster than we can build bicycles. He circled the PLUTO reference with chalk. If this system is real, and I believe it is, then the Allied invasion will not suffer from fuel shortages. They will not rely solely on tankers approaching vulnerable beaches. They will have a hidden artery. He wrote one final word on the board. Weber stared at it. Why inevitable? Because once the Allies establish a beachhead, Rombach explained, they can run as many pipelines as needed. The channel becomes not a barrier, but a supply tunnel. We cannot sink a pipe. We cannot bomb it. We cannot interdict it. It lies on the seabed, invisible. Weber tried to speak, but found no words. Finally he managed. We must report this to the General Staff. Rombach sighed. We will. And they will laugh again. Until the day they realize those pipes have already begun pumping fuel into France. The report they sent up the chain returned 2 days later with a red stamp. Nicht ernst zu nehmen, not to be taken seriously. Berlin was drowning in false assumptions, and the truth struggled like a man underwater. By the 3rd week of May, Allied bombing intensified. Synthetic fuel. Plants at Leuna and Bohlen were hit repeatedly. Aviation gasoline production fell again. Panzer divisions in the West reported shortages so severe that training maneuvers were curtailed. The Luftwaffe received barely enough fuel for a handful of sorties. And yet, the German High Command still believed the Allies suffered the same constraints. Weber and Rombach met frequently, whispering in dim offices lit by rationed electricity. They studied maps, tide charts, shipping intelligence, British industrial output. Each day, Rombach grew more convinced. The British have the one resource Germany lacks, he said. Industrial excess. They never ask, can we spare the steel? They ask, how many factories should we assign? He tapped a stack of British production estimates. They can build 20 miles of pipe in a few days if they choose. But why would they risk so much steel on an experiment? Because, Rombach said softly, if it works, the invasion becomes unstoppable. On the final day of May, Weber stood outside headquarters. As distant thunder rolled from the west, the sound of another bombing raid on the fuel plants that kept the Wehrmacht alive. The sky glowed faintly orange. Smoke drifted eastward like the breath of a dying animal. He remembered Adler's laughter. He remembered Muller's jokes. He remembered the red stamp. Not to be taken seriously. But Weber no longer felt doubt. Somewhere across the channel, men were assembling pipes. Men were preparing pumps. Men were preparing to transform the ocean into a silent reservoir. And Germany, blind, confident, proud, still believed the sea would save them. It would not. It would deliver their defeat. June arrived with a violence that no German planner had predicted. The thunder that shook Wünsdorf in the early hours of June 6th was not weather, it was history announcing itself. Reports flooded into the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. Allied landings. Normandy. Beaches. Airborne troops everywhere. Naval gunfire of unimaginable scale. The invasion had come. In the logistics annex, Weber's pencil trembled as he traced the unfolding situation across a wall map. Red arrows the Allies spread like cracks in glass across the coast of France. He heard footsteps behind him. Oberingenieur Rombach entered the room, hair dishevelled, coat unbuttoned, face pale. It has begun, he said simply. Weber nodded. Yes, sir. Rombach tossed a folder onto the table. Inside were reconnaissance photographs from a Luftwaffe Ju-88 flight that had barely survived the wall of Allied fighters. The blurry images showed ships, so many ships, that the sea itself seemed to have sprouted steel. "Look here," Rombach whispered, pointing at dark shapes trailing behind larger vessels. "Tanker convoys. Flexible pipelines one could float during initial landing stages. This is temporary, of course. But temporary is all they need until PLUTO comes online." Weber tightened his jaw. "Still no confirmation of the system itself?" "No," Rombach replied. "But look at their scale of preparation. The Allies have flooded the channel with so much material that they could fuel entire armies for months. Imagine what they will do once they secure ports." Weber exhaled sharply. "Sir, if their fuel distribution is already this strong before any port is captured, PLUTO must be nearly ready." Rombach's eyes flickered with grim certainty. "I believe it is already built." At 10 in the morning, the logistics division assembled for an emergency briefing. Senior officers packed into a narrow room lit by a single dim lamp. Cigarette smoke clung to the air like fog. Generalmost Dietrich von Kessel, head of the Wehrmacht's supply branch, entered briskly. He looked exhausted, his uniform creased, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "We face a grave situation," von Kessel announced. "The enemy has established beachheads. They appear to have limitless supply reserves aboard the invasion fleet. But they will falter when they attempt to sustain operations ashore. Their Achilles' heel is fuel. They cannot land enough tankers through makeshift beach facilities. This invasion can and will be suffocated." Weber felt his stomach twist. A familiar chorus of nods spread through the room. They still believed fuel would save Germany. Rombach leaned forward, voice steady but edged with danger. "Sir, with respect, we have evidence the Allies have developed a system to move fuel through pipelines placed on the seabed." The room went still. Von Kessel's brow tightened with irritation. "I have read your memorandum, Oberingenieur. It is fantasy. No pipeline of such length could survive the channel." "It does not have to survive for years," Rombach countered. "Only long enough." Murmurs broke out. A colonel scoffed audibly. Von Kessel's voice sharpened. "Enough. Germany built the best engineers in Europe. If such a thing were possible, we would have done it. The British are desperate improvisers, not innovators. Their industry is amateur compared to ours." Rombach stared at him. "Sir, their industry is backed by the United States." Silence again, a colder silence. Von Kessel dismissed the point with an impatient wave. "We must focus on real dangers. Their airborne troops, their naval guns, their beach supply struggles. Their fuel will run short within weeks." Rombach's voice cracked. "Sir, that is exactly what they know we believe." The general's glare froze him. "This briefing is over." After the meeting, Weber found Rombach sitting alone at a metal table in the dim hallway, head in his hands. "They will not listen," Weber said softly. Rombach looked up, his expression hollow. "They cannot. To believe PLUTO is real means admitting the invasion cannot be defeated. They would rather believe physics is on our side." Weber sat beside him. "What should we do?" Rombach opened a folder filled with Allied industrial estimates. He pointed to one line. "American petroleum production vastly exceeds all Axis output. They have enough fuel to burn," he whispered. "We have enough to ration. That difference is already deciding the war." He tapped another line. "Expected introduction of pipeline systems by midsummer." "Weber," he said, voice lowering to a near whisper. "If PLUTO begins pumping fuel into France, the Allies will no longer fear weather, shipping losses, tides, or port damage. They will fight with rivers of petrol while we fight with drops." He closed the folder. "When that happens, the war ends, not instantly, but inevitably." Weber stared at the wall. Outside, the low rumble of distant bombers drifted across the countryside. Another synthetic fuel plant was dying in flames. He realized, with a heavy clarity he wished he could unknow, that the ocean Germany trusted as a shield was already becoming a concealed artery of defeat. And nobody in Berlin was ready to believe it. By early July of 1944, Berlin lived in a permanent twilight, part smoke, part exhaustion, part fear. Yet, inside the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht logistics complex, what frightened Weber most was not the Allied bombs, or the crumbling Eastern Front, or even the collapse of the Luftwaffe. It was the reports beginning to arrive from Normandy, reports whose implications nobody in authority wanted to confront. Fuel. Allied fuel. More of it than German analysts could account for. The 4th Panzer Army's reconnaissance units, operating near Avranches, had intercepted motorized columns pushing inland faster than any German planner expected. Captured Allied drivers laughed when interrogated, claiming their tanks and trucks were never thirsty, while American mechanics bragged that they would draw from the big hose soon enough. The big hose. That phrase appeared in 3 separate interrogation transcripts, and it terrified Weber. He found Rombach in the map room late on a humid afternoon. Heavy shutters blocked most of the sunlight, making the room feel like a bunker under a dying sun. Rombach stood before a large map of Normandy, pins marking Allied fuel dumps, supply depots, and suspected storage sites. His hands trembled slightly as he studied a new report that had arrived only an hour earlier. "What is it?" Weber asked. "Another French resistance message decoded by our counterintelligence units," Rombach said quietly. "They claim the Allies have constructed pumping stations near Isle of Wight, disguised as ordinary seaside buildings. They mention pressure valves and pipes." Weber's stomach tightened. "Pipes actually in use?" Rombach nodded. "Possibly. They describe truck convoys in Normandy receiving fuel that does not originate from tankers at the beaches. They speak of hoses leading to temporary storage tanks inland. The parley amounts described are unusual too high for tanker landings alone." Weber stepped closer. "Sir, is this confirmation?" Rombach closed his eyes for a moment. "It is the first whisper." Weber. "But yes, this is consistent with PLUTO becoming operational." He tapped the French report. "They say the Allies are calling it the magic tap. Fuel appears, as if drawn from nowhere." Weber felt his breath shorten. He looked at the map again, past the clusters of Allied divisions pressing toward Saint-Lô, past the tangled hedgerows, past the German counterattacks already faltering from lack of petrol. "How much fuel could they be moving?" he asked. "That depends on pump pressure, pipe diameter, and number of lines. But even a modest system could deliver tens of thousands of gallons per day. And if they built multiple pipelines—" Rombach didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. 2 days later, Weber attended a situation meeting in a stifling underground conference room. Generals grumbled over maps, their tempers short, their assumptions unyielding. Reports from Normandy painted a grim picture. German armored units were starving for fuel, while American Sherman columns rolled across hedgerows with shocking mobility. General von Kessel paced, sweating through his collar. "How are they moving so fast?" he demanded. "Beach capacity cannot support such volumes. Where is their fuel coming from?" An intelligence officer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, some interrogations claim British pumps under the sea." Laughter erupted, instantly forced, brittle, desperate. Von Kessel slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough with these fairy tales. The Allies are simply benefiting from our delays and traffic congestion." Weber felt a surge of frustration. He rose from his seat. "General, these stories appear repeatedly. Independent sources, resistance groups, prisoners, aerial observers are describing fuel movement inconsistent with known tanker deliveries." Von Kessel glared at him. "Are you suggesting tanks are drinking seawater, Hauptmann?" "I am suggesting," Weber said carefully, "that the Allies may have found a way to push fuel across the channel without ships." Von Kessel scoffed. "And next you will tell me they can send electricity through clouds." Rombach rose beside Weber. "Sir, the engineering is sound. the British have experimented with underwater cables for decades. The Americans have industrial capabilities beyond anything Europe has ever seen. The technical obstacles are not insurmountable. A silence fell. Not acceptance, only discomfort. Von Kessel waved them away. We face a real invasion, not a fantasy. Gentlemen, let us return to facts. But Weber could see it now, the fear behind the general's eyes, the sense that the world was shifting in ways the old guard could not comprehend. After the meeting, Rombach and Weber walked outside into the muggy heat. The air smelled of pine, engine oil, and defeat. A distant train rumbled toward the south, carrying the last meager fuel reserves Germany could scrape together. Rombach spoke first. They know we cannot believe it. That is their greatest advantage. Weber nodded slowly. Because to believe it would mean admitting the invasion cannot be stopped. Exactly. They reached the edge of the headquarters courtyard, where a single pine tree stretched upward like a lonely sentinel. Under its shade, Rombach pulled from his coat a folded set of blueprints he had drawn himself. "What is this?" Weber asked. "A projection," Rombach replied. "Based on British pipe manufacturing capacity, American steel output, and the pattern of Allied supply dumps." He unfolded the papers, hands shaking. Weber felt the breath leave his lungs. Lines, thin, long, and unmistakably deliberate, ran across the channel from the Isle of Wight to the Normandy coast. Several lines, multiple diameters, parallel systems. "You are certain," Weber whispered. "As certain as one can be without seeing them," Rombach said. "They must have begun laying these pipes months ago, under cover of night, under the protection of their naval supremacy." He looked up at Weber. "And now, those pipes are beginning to flow." That night Weber could not sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the dim glow of a single lamp, thinking of the channel, the vast blue ribbon that German planners believed protected Europe from endless American petroleum. But now that ribbon was pierced, hollowed, repurposed, a conduit, a silent artery, a weapon Germany never imagined. He whispered into the dark. "They have turned the ocean into a pipeline." And for the first time since the war began, Weber understood that the defeat he sensed was not the result of battlefield failures, or tactical errors, or even Hitler's madness. It was mathematics. The Allies had more fuel than Germany could ever destroy, more steel than Germany could ever intercept, more industry than Germany could ever bomb. PLUTO was no fantasy. It was the future. And the future was already flowing beneath the sea. By early August of 1944, the German front in Normandy no longer resembled a line, it resembled collapse in slow motion. Reports arrived in Wünsdorf so quickly that the teleprinter operators could barely keep pace. American and British armoured divisions were not just advancing, they were devouring ground at a tempo the General Staff found mathematically impossible. Tanks needed fuel, trucks needed fuel, aircraft needed fuel, and the Allied armies seemed to have unlimited amounts of it. In Berlin, officers muttered explanations. Captured German depots, inflated claims, temporary surges. Anything but the truth Weber and Rombach now saw with chilling clarity. PLUTO was working. On the morning of August 3rd, Weber arrived at headquarters to find a new intelligence report on his desk intercepted British communications referencing operational flow from Bambi 1. Bambi 1 was an Allied codename, meaning nothing to German analysts except one detail: flow. Flow meant liquid. Liquid meant fuel. Fuel meant PLUTO. He carried the report to Rombach, who read it once, then twice, then dropped into his chair as if struck. "Bambi 1, he whispered. "That must be the first pipeline." Weber nodded. "It has to be. The wording is too precise." Rombach stared blankly at the map wall. "Then the Allies are receiving fuel from Britain directly into Normandy. At scale." They both fell silent. Outside, the courtyard echoed with boots as clerks rushed between buildings carrying bad news that no longer shocked anyone. The Soviet steamroller was approaching Warsaw. The Anglo-Americans were breaking out of Normandy, and Germany had no oil left to dream with. By August 6th, the breakout from Avranches was in full motion. Patton's Third Army surged, south and east like a flood leaking through a breached dam. The daily speed of advance dwarfed German predictions. American armored columns were covering 20 to 30 miles per day. German officers explained this away with practiced arrogance. They are reckless. They will outrun their supply lines. They will stall any day now. But they did not stall. And every evening the teleprinter brought new horrors. Fresh American divisions rolling forward without pause, armored cavalry racing through gaps in the lines, British tanks swinging south toward Falaise with terrifying momentum. Meanwhile, German formations were dying of thirst, mechanical thirst. One Panzer division reported its daily fuel consumption had fallen below 2% of its minimum requirement. Another wrote simply, "Vehicles immobilized, ammunition plentiful, fuel non-existent." To Weber, the contrast felt like cruelty, an equation written in suffering. On August 10th, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilot returned with blurry photographs taken through flak-shredded windows. The images showed enormous lines of Allied fuel trucks moving inland from Normandy, not from ports, but from what appeared to be newly constructed pump houses near the coast. Weber felt his pulse quicken as he studied the prints. They are receiving fuel directly at these structures. Look, hoses, tanks, pressure valves. Rombach leaned over the table and noticed the spacing. Multiple pump houses, each a few hundred meters apart. This matches the layout needed for pipeline distribution. He tapped one building with a trembling hand. "This is a pumping station." Weber whispered the words he did not want to say aloud. "PLUTO is not coming. It is here." The next morning, Rombach demanded an audience with General Major von Kessel. They were shown into a dim office lit by a single bulb. Maps littered the floor like wounded soldiers. Von Kessel did not look up immediately. When he finally did, his eyes were hollow from sleepless nights. What is it now? Another fantasy about underwater miracles? Rombach laid the aerial photographs on the desk. "This is not fantasy," he said. "This is reality. The Allies have built functioning seabed pipelines. They are pumping fuel from Britain into France as we speak." Von Kessel squinted, annoyed. "These could be ordinary fuel dumps." "They are not," Rombach insisted. "Look at the structures. Those are pump houses, and here truck lines forming faster than beach deliveries can explain. Sir, if these pipes function at scale, the Allies can support an endless advance." Von Kessel's voice sharpened. "Endless? Nothing is endless." Rombach did not blink. "Petroleum backed by American industry might as well be." The general slammed a fist onto the desk. "We will not base strategic conclusions on speculation." "Speculation?" Rombach snapped. "Our forces are immobilized from lack of fuel. Theirs are moving like lightning." "There is only one explanation." Von Kessel rose from his chair. "Enough. I refuse to believe that the channel has been turned into a giant pipe. The sea is not a highway, gentlemen." "It has been," Rombach whispered. The general froze, but he said nothing more. The meeting ended in frustration and silence. By mid-August, the Falaise pocket began to close. German units trapped inside signaled desperate requests for fuel drops. Trucks ran dry. Tanks were abandoned. Staff cars were left on roadsides like metallic corpses. Soldiers marched on foot toward escape, while Allied columns moved on engines that never seemed to falter. Weber read every new signal with growing dread. Panzer regiment unable to move, fuel exhausted. Half-track battalion stranded at road junction, vehicles abandoned. Retreat impossible due to gasoline shortage. And on the Allied side? Reports described rivers of trucks flowing from Normandy, carrying fuel that had no identifiable supply source, no tankers at the beaches, no reliance on vulnerable ports, just an endless, steady inland pulse, like blood from an unseen heart. On the night of August 20th, Weber sat alone in his office, staring at the channel map. The blue ribbon no longer appeared as a barrier. It felt like an open wound. He whispered to himself, "They solved the one problem we assumed would protect us. They solved fuel. He leaned back, exhausted, defeated. They are fighting the war we feared, and we are fighting the war we imagined. Outside, Berlin was quiet for a moment, the air heavy with summer heat and distant artillery from training grounds that now existed mostly for show. The war was slipping away, not with dramatic tank battles, but with the quiet inevitability of fuel flowing under the sea. September of 1944 arrived with a chill that seeped through the concrete walls of the Wünsdorf headquarters. The Reich's borders were shrinking, and so too was the illusion that the German High Command understood the war it was fighting. Yet even now, inside the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht logistics wing, denial persisted like a stubborn fever. But for the first time, reality carved a crack through that fever, delivered by a report so alarming that even the most arrogant staff officers hesitated before dismissing it. And that report did not come from intelligence intercepts, nor from French resistance sources, nor from whispered prisoner interrogations. It came from a German general in the field. General Oberst Hans von Obstfelder, commanding forces in the collapsing remnants of Army Group B, telegraphed a message on September 2nd that caused Weber's breath to catch the moment he read it. Enemy armoured units advancing with apparent inexhaustible petrol supply. Movements exceed capacity explainable by beaches or ports. Suspect new method of fuel delivery. Further investigation required. Further investigation. The words felt like a lifeline. For months, Weber and Rombach had fought uphill battles against disbelief, arrogance, and old-world assumptions. But here, finally, was someone in authority who faced a logistical phenomenon so incomprehensible he dared not ignore it. Weber rushed the report to Rombach, who was hunched over a drafting table covered in Allied fuel consumption models. Rombach read it once and whispered, "At last. A commander who notices." Weber nodded. "He is asking the same question we have been asking for months. Where is the fuel coming from?" Rombach stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. "We take this to von Kessel immediately. No excuses." General Major von Kessel looked gaunt when they entered his office, as though defeat had begun carving its conclusion into his bones. Maps lay scattered across the floor, marking the relentless Allied drive toward the German frontier. Weber handed him the report. Von Kessel skimmed it, frowning. "He suspects a new method of fuel delivery." "Yes, sir," Weber said. "Which means he has noticed what we have noticed." Rombach leaned forward. "This is not speculation from prisoners or civilians. This is an observation from the field." Von Kessel placed the report on his desk but did not speak. Weber pressed on, heart pounding. "Sir, the Allies are not slowing, not even in terrain that should hinder them. Their trucks move ceaselessly. Their tanks maneuver without pause. This cannot be explained by tanker landings or captured depots." Von Kessel drummed his fingers on the desk. "And you attribute this to your underwater pipeline?" "Not mine," Rombach said sharply. "Theirs, the British and Americans. Their PLUTO system is real. It is operational, and it is supplying their armies as they advance across France." Von Kessel exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "Gentlemen, even if such a thing existed, how much could it truly supply? Enough for a division, a corps, but not an entire army group." Rombach opened his notebook, flipping to a page covered in calculations. "Sir, with sufficient pumps, they could deliver tens of thousands of gallons per day in the early stages. By now, if they expanded their capacity, they may be supplying hundreds of thousands." Von Kessel stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Hundreds of thousands?" "Yes," Rombach said. "It is not fantasy, it is mathematics," Weber added. "And it would explain everything we have observed since July." Von Kessel leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You realize what you are implying?" Rombach nodded. "Yes, sir. That the invasion was never at risk of fuel collapse, that the channel is no longer a barrier, that the Allies have created a logistical artery we cannot interdict." A long silence followed. Finally, von Kessel spoke. "Leave the documents. I will review them." It was not acceptance. But it was no longer dismissal. It was the first step. 3 days later, an emergency meeting was called, this time by von Kessel himself. Weber and Rombach entered a conference room filled with officers who, for the first time, looked uncertain. Von Kessel stood at the head of the table. "I have reviewed the field reports, the reconnaissance photographs, the consumption estimates, and the enemy movement patterns," he began. "There is a consistent discrepancy of fuel accounting. Trucks moving where no tanker ships exist. Armored formations accelerating where they should be slowing. A tempo of operations unmatched by any previous campaign." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I can no longer dismiss the possibility that the Allies have established a concealed method of delivering fuel from Britain directly to the continent." Gasps. Muffled curses. A few pale faces. One colonel blurted, "But that would mean—" "Yes," von Kessel said. "It would mean we have fundamentally misjudged the enemy." He gestured to the wall map. "The Allied advance from Normandy into France has exceeded all predictions, not because of tactical brilliance alone, but because their logistical backbone is far stronger than we assumed." Rombach spoke up. "Sir, with respect, this is the consequence of underestimating their industry. The British conceived the project. The Americans manufactured it. Together, they made the impossible real." The room fell into a stunned quiet. Then von Kessel delivered the sentence that Weber would remember for the rest of his life. "If these pipelines are indeed supplying their armies, then there is no conventional method by which we can stop them." It was an acknowledgement of defeat, not of the war, but of an idea. The idea that Germany could strangle the invasion through starvation of fuel. That idea was now dead. After the meeting, Weber and Rombach stepped outside into the cool September air. The first crisp, herald of autumn brushing their faces. Rombach lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "We finally convinced them," Weber said quietly. "No," Rombach replied, staring at the sky. "Reality convinced them. We merely survived long enough to witness it." Weber nodded slowly. "What happens now? What always happens when a war is decided not by battles, but by arithmetic?" Rombach said, "The rest is delay and suffering." Above them, somewhere beyond the clouds, Allied bombers droned across the sky, burning oceans of fuel Germany could no longer dream of possessing. Fuel that flowed beneath the sea, through pipes Germany never believed could exist. Fuel that would carry the Allied armies to Germany's borders and beyond. October arrived with a bitterness that no change of weather could explain. Berlin's skies were low and bruised, heavy with smoke and the distant thunder of Allied bombers that seemed to prowl the heavens without pause. Yet, inside Wünsdorf, the real blow came not from the air, but from a thin, innocuous envelope delivered by a breathless courier from the Western Front. The envelope contained the one thing German officers had refused to believe possible: physical evidence of PLUTO. It was a cold morning when Weber entered Rombach's office and found him staring at a bundle of photographs spread across his desk. For a moment, Weber thought he was looking at images of factory piping or industrial machinery. Then he recognized the coastline, the camouflage netting, the peculiar shape of steel casings. Rombach lifted a picture with trembling fingers. "Taken near Cherbourg 3 days ago, our forward reconnaissance detachment infiltrated a recently abandoned British engineering site." Weber's eyes widened. "Is that—" "Yes," Rombach whispered. "A pipeline end terminal. A real one. One of theirs." He handed Weber another photograph. This one showed a cylindrical metal section attached to what looked like a prestivations, reinforced concrete foundation. British tool markings were visible on the flange edges. "This section," Rombach explained, "matches the specifications of the British Hayes cable. Hollow core, wire reinforcement, designed to carry petrol under pressure." Weber stared at the image, unable to speak. It was no longer theory, no longer speculation, no longer rumor. This was PLUTO in steel, ripped from the shoreline like a fossil torn from ancient rock. 2 hours later, They carried the photographs into General Major von Kessel's office. The general had aged 10 years since summer. His uniform hung a little looser. His hands trembled slightly as he poured himself coffee. When he saw the first photograph, he froze. "What am I looking at?" he asked, voice flat. "A section of the Allied seabed pipeline," Rombach replied. "Recovered intact." Von Kessel leaned in, jaw tightening. "Are you certain?" "Completely certain," Rombach said. "This matches every British technical experiment with undersea cable construction dating back to the 1920s. The Americans have industrialized it to unprecedented scale." Von Kessel picked up a photograph showing a saw-cut cross-section of the pipe. The interior lining glistened dark with traces of petrol. He let out a long, defeated exhale. "So it is true," Weber spoke quietly. "Yes, sir. The Allies are drawing fuel from Britain as easily as from a refinery on the coast." The general closed his eyes. "Then their advance will not slow. Not from fuel shortages. Not from supply constraints." He opened them again, and Weber saw something he had never seen before in von Kessel's gaze acceptance. "This," the general said, holding up the photograph, "is the death certificate of our Western Front." Word spread through the logistics wing within hours. Officers who had laughed at the idea only weeks ago now clustered around the photographs like men studying an alien artifact. Whispered conversations rippled through the corridors. How did they do it? Across the entire channel? With no detection? Why did we not think of it? Weber listened to these whispered questions and felt an ache in his chest. He knew the answer to the last one. Because Germany believed technology must be elegant, not industrial. Because Germany believed problems must be solved with genius, not scale. Because Germany believed the sea was a shield, not a bridge. The Allies had believed none of these things. That afternoon, von Kessel convened a closed-door meeting with the logistics and intelligence branches. The atmosphere was heavy, funereal. On the table lay the photographs, the cross-section of pipeline, the Allied engineering notes captured at Cherbourg. Von Kessel began in a low voice. "Gentlemen, the evidence is irrefutable. The Allies have pipelines operating under the Channel. They have extended them inland. Their armies are drinking British petrol directly without tankers." Silence followed his words like a shadow. A colonel finally spoke. "Sir, how much fuel can these pipelines provide?" Rombach answered without hesitation. "With the pump stations, we have identified several tens of thousands of gallons daily, possibly more if multiple lines are working in parallel." The colonel swallowed hard. "Then our assumption of Allied supply fragility was wrong," Rombach finished. "Hopelessly, completely wrong." Another officer raised a trembling hand. "Can we destroy the pipelines? Bomb the pump houses?" Von Kessel shook his head. "We do not control the skies. We cannot reliably target anything along the Normandy coast, and the pipelines themselves lie under the sea. Even if we struck one, the Allies could lay another." He paused. "Besides, they have already pumped enough fuel ashore to sustain operations deep into France." The room went still. It was the closest any German officer had come to admitting the war was irretrievable. After the meeting, Weber and Rombach walked outside into the grey October afternoon. Fallen pine needles crunched underfoot. Somewhere to the north, the distant rumble of artillery shook the horizon, a reminder that the front was drawing closer. Rombach broke the silence. "Do you understand what this means?" Weber nodded. "That we will never catch up. Not with our fuel plants bombed, not with our railways shattered, not with our synthetic production failing." "No," Rombach said softly. "It means something more tragic." Weber turned to him. "It means," Rombach continued, "that the outcome was decided long before Normandy. The moment the first section of PLUTO touched the seabed, the invasion ceased to be a gamble. It became a certainty." Weber felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "In war," Rombach said, "fuel is willpower made liquid. The Allies now have willpower delivered by pump." The wind rustled the trees. Weber whispered. And we have none. That night, Weber returned to his quarters and stared at the photograph of the severed pipeline segment lying on his desk. He traced the steel ridges with his fingers as though touching an artifact from another civilization. A pipeline. A simple idea. Executed at scale beyond imagination. Germany had believed oceans protected them. The Allies had believed oceans could be conquered with metal and pressure. One belief was rooted in tradition, the other in modernity. And modernity had won. The war was not over yet. But Weber understood, with terrible clarity, that its ending had already been written somewhere beneath the cold waters of the English Channel, where steel pipes pulsed with the fuel of invasion. In the second week of November, the first snow dusted the rail yards east of Aachen, settling gently over twisted rails, cratered switching towers, and the skeletal remains of freight cars frozen where they had died. What had once been the beating heart of the Reich's western logistics now resembled an archaeological ruin. The crunch of boots on frost, not locomotive pistons, was the only sound. And in that bleak, broken landscape, German supply officers witnessed something they could not reconcile with reality. Despite weather, despite distance, despite the complete collapse of the French rail net behind them, American armored divisions were burning fuel as though they were connected to an invisible refinery. In truth, they were. Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Weber received the first field report on a fog-bound morning while standing inside a gutted signal house east of Jülich. The electricity had failed months earlier, leaving the room lit only by a trembling lantern whose flame distorted the pale winter light. Weber scanned the report delivered by an Oberfeldwebel whose uniform reeked of mud, cordite, and defeat. American tank units crossed the Inde River yesterday, the man reported. There, Sherman battalions moved as if fuel were unlimited. We destroyed 50,000 litres in storage, yet their pace does not change. Weber frowned. And their supply convoys? The sergeant hesitated. Hardly any, sir. Not in the volumes we expected. That was the detail that made Weber's blood run cold. Fuel consumption followed mathematical laws as immutable as gravity. To move armoured divisions across France and Belgium at sustained operational tempo required tonnage oceans of it delivered daily. By all German estimates, the Allies should have been strangling on their own success. Instead, they were moving like a machine continuously fed. Weber dismissed the sergeant and stepped outside into the icy wind. He looked west, where distant American artillery flashed like tiny silent stars through the fog. He knew coldly, logically, reluctantly, that the explanation was PLUTO. The pipeline should not have worked. It should not have survived the channel. It should not have delivered fuel in such quantities. But it had. And now every forward American armoured thrust was being powered by an undersea artery. Germany had failed to sever, failed even to understand. For the first time in the war, Weber felt something deeper than fear, deeper than despair. He felt irrelevance. 3 days later, he rode with Oberst Rombach to a forward command post near Düren. They travelled in a freezing Opel staff car whose heater had died long ago, navigating roads washed out by bombs and debris. Every bridge they crossed creaked ominously, patched with whatever steel or timber the engineers could scavenge. Along the way, they passed scenes that jarred Weber's nerves. Burned-out fuel trucks, frozen horses lying dead in ditches, soldiers dragging sledges loaded with jerrycans because gasoline for motorized transport was nearly non-existent. Everywhere Weber looked, the Wehrmacht was starving. Starving for fuel, starving for rubber, starving for transport capability. Yet, the Allies, flush with supply, were now pressing against the Siegfried Line. Inside the command post, they found General Major von Kessel hunched over a makeshift map table built from a door laid across ammunition crates. The general looked older than he had a month before. His hair had turned almost entirely white. "Report," he said without turning. Rombach unfolded a map marked with red arrows indicating Allied thrusts. "Sir, our forward observers estimate the Americans are burning fuel at a rate consistent with continuous resupply. Not intermittent, not improvised. Continuous. Impossible," von Kessel muttered, though without conviction. "Sir." The PLUTO network is fully operational. It is the only explanation. Von Kessel stared at him with hollow eyes. Pipelines do not cross oceans, Hauptmann. Weber slid a captured engineering schematic across the table. These do. The general studied the schematic for a long, silent minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost reverent. I fought in the Great War, he said. Back then, we understood supply. You hauled it by horse, by rail, by truck. Always overland, always vulnerable. But these allies, they have created something beyond strategy. They have built inevitability. He leaned back, exhausted. They no longer fight our army. They fight our mathematics. That afternoon, Weber accompanied Rombach to the shattered rail hub at Stolberg, where a Luftwaffe liaison officer had requested an urgent meeting. Luftwaffe detachments always carried an air of desperation, but this man looked especially haunted. We attacked an American fuel dump 2 nights ago, he said, breath frosting in the air. Large tanks, storage drums, what we assumed was their fuel reserve. And? Weber prompted. And nothing changed, the officer whispered. Their tank units continued advancing with identical speed. Identical intensity. Weber felt a chill run through him. How? The officer handed him a small notebook filled with reconnaissance notes. They have multiple redundancy, he said. Fuel dumps, truck convoys, rail shipments from Cherbourg, the pipeline grid inland, and the undersea pipeline behind all of it, which feeds the rest. Rombach exhaled slowly. That is why the Americans never pause. Destroy one node, 3 others feed the network. Weber closed the notebook, pulse heavy in his throat. PLUTO was no longer a single pipeline. It was a circulatory system, and the Reich had no scalpel capable of severing it. That night, Weber walked alone along a bombed rail spur outside Düren, lantern in hand. Snow whipped across the fields. The distant rumble of American armor was faint but unmistakable, a continuous, mechanical hum that neither weather nor destruction could halt. He knelt beside the twisted remains of a rail tanker car, its steel sides peeled open like a tin can. He ran a gloved hand along the metal. Once, Germany's might had flowed through rail cars like this, through tankers and drums and convoys. Once, the Reich had believed the ocean was a wall impenetrable, insurmountable. Now, the Allies had turned that same ocean into a highway for fuel. A silent, invisible highway Germany could not bomb, could not sink, could not even truly comprehend until it was too late. He rose slowly, the snowfall thickening, blurring the horizon. In the distance, American engines roared constant, confident, unstoppable. Fuel that should not exist was driving them. Fuel that crossed an ocean inside tubes Germany said could never work. Fuel that mocked the Reich's last hopes. Weber whispered into the wind. We lost the war the moment the ocean carried petrol, and for the first time, he truly believed it.